Welcome to Cure America. I'm Star Parker. What a wonderful season we're living in. And I thought for the new year, we would look back on 2020 just a little bit and then go into 2021 with some hope, encouragement, perspective. And so I have my same special guest, our panelists from Cure America. The first we're going to start with, again, is Dr. William Allen. You know him as the Chief Operating Officer for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, as well as his long resume in mostly political science. So you heard his testimony last week. Now we're going to dive into a little bit of his ideas and thoughts. So I appreciate you being here with us, and I appreciate you being here with me as well, Dr. Allen.
It's a joy. It's a joy, and Happy New Year.
I know, huh? Happy New Year. Well, let's hope it's really happy. I don't know. I'm a happy person, so I came out of 2020 happy. I went into 2020 happy. I sat through COVID happy, yes. Even though it's like, okay, Lord, whatever it is you're trying to do here, I suppose we can be happy. We could be worse. We could have been in jail.
It could be a lot worse, but you know.
Then they let everybody in jail out, so we could have been in jail and then out. Never mind. Go ahead. What were you saying?
If we come out, we'd spread the disease.
Oh no!
In any event, but you know, we entered the year without fear. That's the important part. That's what makes it a happy new year. We're not pretending the world doesn't have problems, but we don't have fear. We're not ruled by fear. We're blessed by freedom from fear.
Well, that is true, but a lot of people are afraid. So maybe we should start there. Let's look at 2020 and how did we get to where we were so afraid? The first few months, everybody was excited. The economy was roaring. We were looking at portfolios, financial portfolios that were doing really well. We were in the churches singing, and then all of a sudden in March, it just came to a stop. And I think fear did enter in.
Yes, you're right. I think people were terrified by what they heard. They were terrified by what the government was asking them to do and by the threats that were posed in front of them. And the way we talked about this plague, you would have thought the world were coming to an end.
Right.
But what surprised me was how many people were overcome by fear. I initially did not respond to the threats in the way that they were described because I just had a sense that humanity has been here a long time.
Oh, that's true.
It's known many plagues.
Yeah.
And we're so far from what happened in Athens or Kosara thousands of years ago when they met the plagues because their people just lost all touch with reality. Bodies stacked up in the streets. People didn't care anymore about anything. And I couldn't see that happening. And I say it didn't happen to us, even though we had to live through terrible urban turmoils and one incredibly difficult election. The fact of the matter is, the civic body still is clinging, still holding together. We're coming into the new year. We're going to face challenges, real challenges. I am one who thinks that even if I thought the world were coming to an end, at least in terms of our political existence, it still wouldn't overwhelm me.
Well, okay, I'm going to unpack that because there was fear. I think that one of the spotlights was on government and its role in our lives.
Yes.
And I think one of the questions that became dominant was, can we even trust our government? You know, it started breaking down very early. I think many were willing to do a sacrifice if there were a challenge, but it started becoming politicized. But then also on the questions of race and race relationships, we saw things start to break down. Explain to us a little bit about what you're seeing in those two arenas. What I guess I'm saying is some of that fear was justified. Here we're being asked to trust a body of people who were basically no good. When you start thinking about politicizing just this environment that we were in, fear itself was politicized.
Yes.
And then when we saw the so-called peaceful protesters, I think anger entered in because it seemed that either the politicians are 100% lying or they're just moving into this arena of situational ethics that you can do whatever you want to if you have a challenge that you don't like.
Yeah, and don't leave out hatred. So fear, anger, hatred, and then toss in hunger, and you've got the four horsemen of the apocalypse. But in any event, what we could say is that, yes,
because that is true, the hunger and the hatred.
Yeah.
Okay, we saw that in
It's possible to look at these things and see things coming apart. You know, Chinua Achebe, the famous Nigerian novelist, writes a novel called Things Fall Apart. And that just doesn't apply to tribes in Africa, that applies to civilizations as well. They've always fallen apart. And that's why I say I'm not overwhelmed by it. Even if I took a picture and said, look, if I look at the government, if I look at the elections, if I look at the way we respond to the diseases, if I look at the so-called diversity politics, the identity politics, all I can see everywhere is what looks like foreboding, things actually disintegrating around us. But it still wouldn't overwhelm me because I know that there is still a God. There's a God in heaven. And we may not have lived up to what he expected of us, but God will always be God. And there will be a time after this.
But I think the question then is what in the middle of it, like this identity politics is real. And we saw the heavy hand of Black Lives Matters during 2020 take up positions of power, and now they're regulating and forcing companies to do things they don't want to do. And we're hearing a lot of this going into 2021, that this is what the administration is going to look like. They're so involved in ethnic politics that we're not even sure that people will be qualified for their positions. So it seems like we're setting ourselves up even for more division on these questions of identity politics.
Yeah, well, we mustn't fool ourselves. I think it's true that most people in office that are going to be appointed will be qualified. I'm not worried about that.
Okay.
But they're going to be at each other's throats. Right. Why are they going to be at each other's throats? Because the whole society is being divided along identities, racial, ethnic, sexual preference, gender, transgender, whatever, you name it. Right. Look at how they're lining up to claim spots in the administration.
Yes.
The Asian American Pacific Islanders are upset because they can't find a spot in the cabinet. Right. And it goes on and on.
Right. Well, just based on their ethnicity, though. It doesn't sound like it's about their qualifications.
Well, it's based on their ethnicity, but it's also based on their having entitlement claims.
Okay.
That's what identity politics does. It divides us into groups, petty little groups, each of which has an entitlement claim. And what can we see coming out of that? They're going to ultimately be at one another's throats. Right. And the coming administration is not going to be able to deal with it any other way. They've got to feed the beast.
Well, now, in the feeding of the beast, though, now you have half of the country who is not going to be appreciating some of the policies that will come out of this administration anyway. And so what I'm hearing you say is they're going to be cutthroat. So that might be good news coming out of Washington, D.C. If it's shut down, basically, that they're not getting anything done. That would be pretty positive.
Well, they'll get things done, I think, unfortunately, because they just have enough of an edge of control and power that they can still make the government move. But they'll get things done along the line of continuing to divide us, continuing to You see, what happens is, look, you've captured groups in these tiny little gatherings, whether they're blacks, Hispanics, et cetera, who are now at your mercy because you've told them that their only prospect depends on being faithful to you, and you hold the power. So they're
and only based on their ethnicity in that power.
Precisely. So they're going to keep fighting that way, which means we're going to pull apart.
Well, maybe. Well, perhaps, because I think what is different from when the country had to deal with this in the 30s, when the Germans and the Italians and the Irish and everybody else was trying to figure out how to keep part of their identity but become e pluribus unum, they were able to do it, I think, because there was a consensus in society that, no, many become one. We don't want to be balkanized. And that not seeing in this new ethnic policy or politics.
That's because we're living through a big change.
Okay.
Most people probably can't even see it yet and won't see it for years to come or even decades to come. But this was a country in which people lived on the hopes that they inherited from the past. So that they go back to the founding principles and they understood what was projected and the confidence in the people, the self-governing people. They built their lives on the inherited hopes from the past. And we are now casting those aside. And we're building our lives on an undefined future, i.e. we're looking towards a destination and we don't know where it is.
Will we be able to recover then? Will we be able to, I mean, it's kind of like the kid falling off the bike that then they get back up. Will we discover ourselves again and say that maybe the founding principles aren't such a bad idea anyway? Or are we just going to keep down this path until we end up either in a civil war again and or so split up that we're just dysfunctional? Well,
that's the question. That's really going to be the danger of dysfunctional. You can see we'll still have this geography. North America is going to be here, and there'll be people spread all over the place. Will it still be the United States the way we know it? We don't know. And we cannot be committed to seeing this form continue We have to be committed to something greater than this form.
When you say now we're talking about maybe Christian people, individuals, but
Yes.
as a nation,
Yes.
am I hearing you say then that there is a possibility of what we're hearing, that states will become seceded? They're looking at that again to say maybe secession's not a bad idea. We thought we were going to try it once before it didn't work out.
At least operate in a different manner, so it's that there's no longer this principle of unity pulling us together.
Well, but that actually might be a positive thing, because that sounds like it's moving more toward the founding principles that the states have autonomy. And if each state starts to say, you know what, maybe federal government does have too much, maybe there is too much control, maybe they do have too much of our resources there, that this could, amidst the darkness, we might be moving toward that more perfect union that says, just leave us alone, let us live our lives. Don't force me to adopt your values if I don't want to.
Well, you might think that, but you must remember something. It was really critical in the 19th century to recall to Americans, and Abraham Lincoln did this, that there was a central principle.
Right.
There was a maxim of a free society, as he put it. There was the commitment to equality that we got out of the Declaration of Independence and the freedom of conscience, which was at its foundation, that we had to all adhere to in order to make the advanced steps that we needed. And the most important was, of course, to end slavery. That we couldn't do state by state. Stephen A. Douglas said he didn't care whether slavery be voted up or down, let each state go its own way.
Right.
But that leads to disaster.
That's right. It would have, and that's true, but that was a moral question. And now the moral questions of today are the ones that are aggressively dividing us. We've got abortion that's still legal.
Yes.
This is like the question of slavery, the morality question. Yes. Who are we? Well, now we have the LGBTQ, which is forcing all these religious liberty questions that I'll talk to Jonathan about. But this, I don't know, are we at that same point? You mentioned Abraham Lincoln, where a house divided against itself will not stand. And that means that we have to make a decision. Are we going to be biblical and free? Are we going to be secular and statist? The American people, majority, looks like, voted in secular and statist. They want big government and they want secularism. That puts at odds that other half that really wants just religious liberty and freedom.
Well, yes, it puts us at odds, but again, we're just given the same challenge Christ gave us to begin with, the challenge the apostles met, to obey God rather than man.
Okay.
See, it has never been vouchsafed to us that we're going to be comfortable in this world. And
That's true.
While it would be nice if the world were comfortable, a nice home for Christians to live in.
That's what I think that a lot are saddened by, even though we're trying to go into the new year, is that it would be nice to have a Christian country, a country where men and women lived responsibly according to the scripture, but that's not what we've evolved into.
But one has to still be Christian even in hell.
Well, that's true. Well, okay, but we don't want to live in hell. I'm going to appreciate what you've been saying, in that I think it's a window of opportunity, the best of times and the worst of times, but in that we can find freedom by maybe pulling out. Maybe this is a good time to dismantle all these major institutions like our public schools and our public Social Security and all the things that we're forced to do together. Maybe we shouldn't be forced to do them together anymore, and we should just say, okay, maybe y'all want to live over there and we want to live over here. Just leave us alone. Allow us to live free without the heavy hand of government.
I can certainly agree with that in large dimensions, because there are so many things that don't require direction from Washington, D.C., and we shouldn't be imposing it, but we're moving in the direction of imposing more and more. On the other hand, there are a few things that have to bring us together to the e pluribus unum that you talk about. We can't, for example, have a meaningful election ever again, unless we can have clarity about who's registered and eligible to vote.
Right.
That's got to be a national organizing principle.
Well,
that can't be left the way it is now, because it's proved to be the weakness that was exploited.
The huge weakness. This is the country's changed forever, frankly, because unless we correct it, we're not going to be the same country. That means that the majority will rule, and that's not what the founders had in mind.
Well, in fact, unless we correct it, I would say the majority is not going to rule, because this weakness allows for us to manufacture election outcomes without regard to the majority.
Well, we'll have good news on the other side of this break.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. Right now, we're in Alaska unloading a hospital for COVID-19. But right now, our country is in trouble, and people are scared, people are afraid, and we see the violence and the injustices that are taking place. Only God can change this. This is a problem of the human heart. and we have sinned against God, and as a nation we've turned our back on God. And I want you to know that God loves you, He cares for you, and He sent His Son, Jesus Christ, from heaven to this earth to take our sins. And if we'll confess them and repent, turn from them, and believe on His Son, Jesus Christ, God will forgive us and He'll heal our hearts. If you've never invited Christ into your heart, pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry, forgive me. I believe Jesus Christ is your Son. I want to trust Him as my Savior. I want to follow Him as Lord from this day forward forever. Amen. Call that number right now that's on the screen. We've got someone who will pray with you, talk with you, encourage you. God bless.
Well, with 2021, we're on it right now. And, it's interesting because Dr. Allen talked about that fear that gripped us. It gripped me. It was like, okay, I got to get to the place where you understand the scripture. Fear not, don't be troubled. And it was a very frightening 2020. And what's fascinating is when he said, well, so many were afraid for such a long period of time. And I think that there was some reason to be afraid. Not just did the government overextend its role in places, it started picking winners and losers. And I think that's when Americans started getting a little bit, suspicious of, wait a minute, what do we believe and why? And I tell you, I'm not looking too forward to the political environment that will be here in Washington, D.C. 2021. And my next guest, you heard his testimony last week. What I'm doing again is going through our regular panelists, getting insight in their minds of what they're thinking about from 2020 to 2021. And Jonathan Alexandre, thank you for being with us again, our constitutional lawyer in-house from the Liberty Counsel. He actually is a constitutional lawyer with Liberty Counsel, but we just adore him and make sure that we pick his brain on every issue and topic. So I really appreciate you. And I think that you're anticipating a very busy 2021 because of what happened in the political. But let's go back a little bit in 2020 and what that fear that Dr. Allen talked about. Some of it was because of the attack on religious liberty. A lot of it was when your church closes too. I mean, this is your pillar. This is where you go to get fed to get through the week. Yeah. Go back for us a little bit and talk into this.
Absolutely. I think of March 2020 when a pastor was arrested at his home because he decided to hold church the previous Sunday. And, this is outrageous that would occur in the United States, in a country that stands for religious liberty, that a pastor would be hauled off to jail. And his crime is that he wanted to keep his church open despite what the governor and the county had said at the time. And it's incredible. You look at even the polls where every demographic, whether you're white, black, or Democrat, Republic, Latino, Asian, everyone has said that this year has been the most depressing year. Everyone's mental health numbers has gone down. The only individuals that saw an increase in their mental health were those who attended church in person. Wow. As if what the Bible said was true, that I was glad when you said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. And so that's, we're seeing that. Folks depressed, folks wrestling with their mental health. The only place to find solace, it's been shown, has been the church, but that's the one place that government has targeted and has attempted to shut down during these pandemics.
And I think that maybe there's reason behind it, when we start thinking that, God is in everything, that we may not have appreciated how much church meant for us. That we get up Sunday morning, that's the first day of the week. We get up, we get that refreshment, and then we go through the week and then come again. So I want to go into why were they so attacking of the church?
Yeah, I think when you give government the opportunity, they've shown it from the days of Nero all the way through the founding of this country, that they will always hint on the side of repressing religion or directing how you're going to worship. That's always been government's bend.
Isn't that something?
And they'll never change. And if we continue to yield, if we continue to bow the knee to government overreach over our faith in particular, they're never going to give it back. The police state always wants to increase their oversight on how we worship. And so
Wow. No, you have to talk about this a little bit because I'm thinking a couple of things. I mean, when you think about Lord Acton, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. When we think about just this whole environment, I'm thinking about my own personal testimony. Right. When that pastor looked out at 4,000 people and said, why are you living on welfare? It's God or government.
Right.
And now you're putting more meaning into this. So throughout history, government is always opposed to religious liberty.
Absolutely. I mean, it started with the Apostle Peter sitting around the fire. You're going to deny Christ. Do you know Christ? It went through Nero, the beheading of Christians, all the way through down history. You've always seen government put a stranglehold on how we worship, which is why in our founding, I think our founding fathers were great in saying the first thing that we're going to do, the first amendment that we're going to put in place in these Bill of Rights is the right of individuals to worship. Mm-hmm. But that's also exactly where bureaucratic governments, where unfavorable governors have had as their target and have decided to ban worship. I mean, your home
this
state
is
of
deep.
Yeah, let's say your home state of California, 99.1% of individuals are not allowed to worship. It is illegal to worship in California. Illegal to worship with folks outside of your home.
You know, you say it and people are like, that's not true. And then we even have some people argue, well, you know, the church isn't that important because church is in us. We don't have to necessarily go into a building. That's not the church anyway. But there are scriptures that say, don't forsake the assembly. And you go back to Peter. I mean, you go back through even the Old Testament. Right. We saw Daniel, it was about him worshiping and government saying no throughout. So I want you to...
Yeah.
This is a problem.
Yeah. There's so many one another principles in Scripture that you have to do in person. You're required to meet and to gather. That's where we're bolstered. That's where we're given the fuel, our instructions to go out through the rest of the week. That's where all of our encouragement comes. That's where God speaks to us directly from the mouth of a pastor. And of course, the devil has always had it in its crosshairs. And you know, to your point, it was unnerving that while we're fighting these legal cases, we're in the courts making these arguments for churches to reopen, and you'd have opposing counsel and even judges saying, well, this can't be a religious issue because look at the other churches that are willing to close. Look at the other churches that are willing to meet online. Why can't you do the same thing? And I think that was probably the most discouraging thing, that the evangelical church and the church at large wasn't unified in saying that the government has no right to tell us how to worship. If we want to close down for a time being, that's our discretion, but that's not up to a government bureaucracy to dictate how we're going to worship.
But what broke down then? Why did we see that division within the body of Christ? Were some pastors just rendering to Caesar, or were they thinking that, well, you know, God put authorities over us, so we're just supposed to do whatever they say?
Yeah, so you heard that misapplication of Romans 13 a lot. Thankfully, there have been pastors that once iterated Romans 13 that realized that maybe this isn't a Romans 13 moment. It's more of an Acts 2 moment. It's more of I will obey God rather than man. Yeah. And, you know, there's very clear things in Scripture. One of the clearest things is to meet and gather with one another. And so I commend the pastors that from day one said, I will never bow the knee. I will never shut down my church. And those pastors have been vindicated. We've been winning in courts. We've been winning. We've been to the Supreme Court 4 times in this last year with positive results of them sending orders back down to governors saying you cannot have these impositions on religion and on religious worship.
But now you just opened up with saying that this is not new in history. Right. So that means that we're not going to close 2020 with this question settled, especially now. We're starting to see a very secular government come into Washington, which has a lot of power over even the states. Because the first thing they do is threaten, well, we're going to keep your money. I don't know why they have all that money in the first place. Maybe the states will rebel and say, we'll stop sending you the money in the first place. But the power that is going to be here in Washington, D.C. is not power that's friendly to church life. What do you think people should be thinking about then, those that want to express their worship? And I got to tell you, when Dr. Allen mentioned fear, it is a fearful time because too many Christians are willing to just say, well, I don't mind. I'm not going to get thrown into the lion's den. I'm too afraid of conflict, so I'd rather just, be complicit.
Right. And if you yield this line, which many have already, the government's never going to stop their power grab. And you think of a Department of Justice that will be run by a Biden-Harris administration that will be filing in court right alongside these state governments and wanting to err against Christians. They've already made that clear. You think of the EEOC and the employment context that are going to try to choke out religious accommodations if folks, aren't willing to take the vaccine or aren't willing to negotiate their rights of worship.
And every area. The Department of Education controls our schools. The housing department controls where you live. The HHS, as you're mentioning, our health and everything else. So it sounds like we're moving to a place that the church can be very persecuted. And just the remnant church, because others are complicit. They'll just be, oh, okay, fine, I don't want to rock the boat. We talked before about even that Equality Act, that some of the things that if they're put into law, it can get very dark for the body of Christ. So what would you say to that person that says, but I want to love God. I don't want to, if I have to make a choice between God or government, I want to choose God. What would you talk to them about if it gets really dark, if they start really losing their jobs and their ability to be mobile?
So it's always going to be details. There are certain things that I think are non-negotiable. The abortion issue, we'll always have to err on the side of life. We're always going to have to err on the side of one man, one woman marriage. These are things that are non-negotiable. We're always going to have to gather and worship and want to exercise our faith, yes, within our homes, within our churches, but also in the public square. Right. We're also going to have to be willing to proclaim and take whatever abuse may come, relying on what Scripture says, that I once was young and now I'm old and have never seen the righteous forsaken. The fact that God 100% of the time has always worked out things providentially in favor of his child who believes in him.
That is
We're going to have to encourage our people to do so.
That's right. And even amongst dark, because when it gets really dark, maybe we might even start seeing again that crosses should be on churches. Maybe I should bring my Bible back, because slowly but surely we've been asked to take all of these symbols out of our society, and now we're begging to get them back in. Maybe this is a good thing, what we've gone through with COVID and the shutdown of the churches, so people will see how important it is to their lives, or not important in their lives.
Right, and I think it's very important. This will be the litmus test, and I hope that a New Year's resolution for many folks will be, I'm going back to church, and I hope a New Year's resolution for pastors will be, I'm going to hold church. I'm going to keep my doors open. I think that's the first step in the right direction. And think of what you're committing to. You're committing to the body, praying together, gathering together, and hearing directly from the Lord. And that's the answer we need.
It is, and especially, you mentioned the mental health part of it. I mean, people are alone. Many that come to church, they're older, they're alone. This is where they get their fellowship and their peace and their community. And I think that pastors should be mindful of that there should not have even been a question whether we were going to close down. How do you not have the door of the church open for that person when they're most in need, when they're most afraid? So I guess I'm going to ask about 2021. What are you guys seeing over there at Liberty Counsel? It's going to get pretty busy for you, but is this where people should be more involved in their state, local interest? Or, I know we're Washington, we're just going to be shouting at folks that are not going to be listening very well. But where can people put their activity and their activism?
Absolutely. So we have cases open in 7 states as we're speaking right now. So we're going to have a legal fight. Our hands are full all the way through Christmas. We're not going to have much of a holiday, but our eyes forward towards 2021 is continuing these fights, continuing to make the arguments that we've made in court since day one, that the government can't pick winners and losers. You can't have casinos open and liquor shops and pot shops open, but decide to close churches. So we're going to continue to make those arguments, but we need the church locally to say, we believe these things. We believe that it's not just our right, but our duty from God to gather with one another.
Well, that in itself is going to be hard, because that means now you're going to make people very uncomfortable. We become very materialistic as a society, including the pastors themselves, and they don't want those to rock the boat. So I guess my question to you in the last 30 seconds is what I asked Dr. Allen. Are we going to recover? Are we just going to split up and have to start again?
Yeah, so the results are in God's hands. He'll measure our faithfulness. Even Jeremiah wasn't successful in the moment. He knew that Israel was going to rebel, but he was still faithful at the time. I think God's going to always have a remnant, as you mentioned. He's always going to have individuals that are not willing to bow the knee, and hopefully that'll encourage and inspire more and more individuals, as we're doing on the legal front, as needs to be done in the political front, but in everyday life, to stand up, to respect the gospel, and not be afraid to worship in the way that we ought to.
And to speak the gospel, to speak it to our friends. Let's go get more saved up so we can win the culture war. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Same to you. Thank you, Steph.
And I'll be right back again with another special guest. Well, both Dr. Allen and Jonathan Alexander think that we can still be happy in this new year, even though we're at war. We can be encouraged to be beyond fear by saying Christianity has lived longer than a whole lot of this tension. We can be discouraged that it's throughout history that we have to fight for religious liberty and freedom, but it's our turn to do that. And my next guest is going to talk about Washington, D.C. and what we have to look forward to in 2021. Richard Manning, you know him from Americans for Limited Government. His hands are going to be full this year for sure. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
They've been full, and we so appreciate you sharing your testimony last week. I thought it important that people get to know those that are regular panelists here, because now we're in the season of 2021. Everything in Washington is going to change. We're having debates now already about inauguration and whether the president's coming. It's just going to be interesting. So I want your perspective. Come out of 2020, what happened in the election? And then go into 2021.
Well, what happened in the election is Joe Biden's philosophy was rejected in the House of Representatives. The Republicans picked up seats when they were supposed to lose seats. 4 seats in California alone flipped from Democrat to Republican. And so what we saw was a return to normalcy in some districts. Unfortunately, whether you believe it was because of fraud or because of some kind of amazing thing that happened where a lot of people voted for Joe Biden who didn't vote for the other Democrats, it's going to be, we're going to have an interesting government. And a lot's going to depend on what happens in Georgia to prognosticate what's going to happen in 2021.
Well, let's look at Georgia for a minute, because it's interesting that it's so purple, that it is so close, unless we're now looking at polling data that's inaccurate, like we constantly seeing of late, that Georgia is on the table to determine what kind of country we're going to be. The best scenario for those of us that love religious liberty, that really want to limit the role of government in our personal affairs when it comes to how we deal with our economics. Certainly, we do not want to undo all of the gains we've made to protect the most innocent in the womb. Israel is on the table again, too, if the Democrats were to take up power in the Senate. So let's talk about what happens and what we can stop if they don't. And the Senate has that stopgate. And then I want to look at what happens if Georgia goes blue, too.
Okay, well, the answer is if Georgia elects 2 Republicans, Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, at that point, the Republicans will have a majority in the Senate. And what people forget is at the beginning of the president's, if it's President Biden, beginning of his term, Kamala Harris won't be in the Senate anymore. So consequently, the Democrats will be down to 47. So it'd be 52-47 during the illustrious first 100 days. And Mitch McConnell will be able to call the shots in terms of what happens, in terms of appointments, in terms of all the things that matter, what the Senate does in that first 100 days. There would be no massive legislative agenda passed. There would be, it basically would be the same fight we just went through in terms of how to fund the government for the rest of the year. That'd be the major fight.
Well, there will, but there will be fights over confirmations, because there will be plenty that are going to.
There will be fights over confirmations. Yeah.
Are the Republicans strong enough to say values matter? What kind of, or are they just going to allow for any cabinet secretary to come in and all the other officials? What kind of moral agenda do you think, or thread, is still in the Republican Party that would want to stop some of the more radical, and I mean, some of these names that are floating around are radical.
Right.
So is there any energy in the GOP to say, no, that's a non-starter?
Well, what I'd hope would happen is that they held the Obama or the Biden nominees the same standard that the Democrats held the Trump nominees to, and kept that same timetable on them. For many cabinet officials, or really secondary officials, it took 2 years to get them in.
I don't think people appreciate how hard the left was against this.
They
where he couldn't
absolutely
even get people in their jobs. He had to put them in other types of titles just to not even have to be
every single nominee was filibustered, essentially.
Yeah.
And in the Senate, that means it takes 3-4 days, 5 days of calendar to get people in. And so it was an arduous task, and I hope that Senator McConnell, whether he's in the majority or minority, holds the Democrats to the same standard. With that said, I think there will be some rifle shot kind of approaches where they're going to say, this person's a non-starter. And one of the ones I hope that they'll focus on is Xavier Becerra, who is slated to be the head of Health and Human Services.
Oh, my goodness.
He's the California Attorney General now. He's the person who is actually suing James DeLayden who was the guy who went out and actually filmed the Planned Parenthood and showed that they were selling baby body parts.
Selling baby body parts. And then Kamala Harris and Becerra went after
the guy,
people that filmed it, not the people that are selling the baby parts.
Went after the reporter. Went after the reporter rather than the people who are doing the heinous act. And that continues. Becerra has been a leader in terms of the abortion movement and pushing for abortions. And if he gets in as HHS, you're going to see a complete flip in terms of how this government deals with abortions and federalization, federal pushing of abortions versus what happened in the Trump administration.
But then back to my question, is there enough Republican energy? I mean, we run out of steam. It's one of the reasons that the Tea Party came is because Republicans were status quo and doing whatever they wanted to do, and we're not fighting.
The Republican energy comes from the people. The people have to demand that they fight. The people have to say, no, it's not good enough just to sit there and collect your salary and say, oh, there's not much we can do. You have to fight every bit as hard, if not harder, than the Democrats did. That's their responsibility.
So we'll see a whole lot more lobby activity, which I'll be doing a show for people that are not familiar with the role of the lobby here and the activists here, because it seems there will be quite a bit of that. And not just for that cabinet appointment. There are many others that are really, in fact, it seems like he's not even looking at qualifications, just all about ethnic identities and gender identities.
Yeah, it's an astonishing array of people that you look at it and you say, how are these people actually qualified for these jobs? And then what they're qualified based on is their hyphen and what kind of hyphenated person they are. And the thing about this, Star, that's I can handle somebody disagrees with me, okay? And because that's part of politics. We fight back and forth. We come to some kind of middle, and sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. I can handle that. What I can't handle is somebody who's put in a position strictly because of the designated hyphen that they have, and whether it's on the upswing or the downswing, and because that's dangerous. That's dangerous for the country, because at that point, it's justice, for instance, doesn't matter anymore about whether you did a crime or not. It matters what your hyphen is and whether it can be prosecuted or not prosecuted. And that is what becomes very, very dangerous in this circumstance, where basic facts, the law itself, becomes tainted based upon a view of the world of your supposed ethnic identity, religious identity, and the like.
Well, I wouldn't throw religious in there unless you're just talking liberal, because one of the things that they all do have in common is this progressive liberalism. And I think that by ethnically selecting them, it almost puts people on the defense to say, I'm not opposing you because of your ethnicity, I'm opposing you because of the views that you hold. This is what we had to do through Obama. It was everything turned back to, you're just opposing him because of his race. It had nothing to do with the fact that Obamacare was going to disrupt the healthcare system.
That's exactly right, and that's what we're going to see is an attack based on, you don't like this person because they're gay, you don't like this person because they're transgender, you don't like this person because they're black, Hispanic.
But here's my question then, because we know that.
Yeah.
Is there any we're still on Georgia. If the Republicans take it, is it going to really matter that much? It
will matter. It'll matter a great deal. The reason it'll matter a great deal is because who holds the power in terms of the Senate is the person who decides what the agenda is and who comes up. And Mitch McConnell, as he proved under the Merrick Garland situation, where he chose not to put President Obama's nominee up for 9 months to the Supreme Court until there was an election. Who decides the agenda matters a great deal. And what's more, on the budget fights, which are going to matter a lot, on the budget fights and what's going to be the appropriations fights, here's what happens. I'm going to give a little bit of inside baseball. you have the number, how much money they end up spending. But what matters is what you have inserted inside in terms of, they're called policy writers. For instance, we were able to stop affirmatively furthering fair housing, which would have federalized local zoning. We were able to stop that by getting a policy writer into the HUD bill, into the Housing Urban Development Appropriations Bill, that specifically told HUD, you can't enforce this. You can't do certain things that would make this work. Those are the kind
what
of
they said they want back, so you're going to have to watch for
so we're
it and
gonna,
fight to.
and that's why, and those are the kind of things that you fight for, and you win 2, 3, 4 of those battles in every appropriations, and you're able to direct government and stop them from going crazy, and the trade-off is they spend more money because Nancy's going to want to spend a lot more money.
Right.
But we're able to stop them from doing some of the crazier things by doing
really
that.
radical. Okay, so now that's the scenario if the Senate is in the hands of Republicans. The worst case scenario if it's not.
It's not in the hands of Republicans. You still can do that a little bit. It's harder. The fact is, at that point, they eliminate the filibuster, and a lot of the minority power, by minority I mean the party that has fewer votes, power, really goes away. And so you end up having, your battle becomes West Virginia and Joe Manchin.
Okay.
Everything lies on Joe Manchin at that point.
Okay, so now what would keep you up at night? What is the one issue that you will be watching and will be rallying all of us that work together under radar here in Washington? We already know the Equality Act. We already know abortion. I know. Is there anything that also we should say? We got.
Well, let me give you, if I can expand to 2.
Okay, expand it.
Packing the courts.
Okay.
Because packing the courts eliminates any semblance of semblance of having a legal system.
Right, well, that's,
and so
we don't have an election system, so why not attack the legal system?
And the second one is what Nancy Pelosi tried to do during the COVID relief packages. She tried to impose a national mail-in ballot system, which was stopped.
Right.
If you eliminate the filibuster, that will go into effect. And what we saw in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania and Detroit, Michigan, and the like, what we saw there, the massive fraud will be nationwide. And the reason they want to do that is because that ensures that they have power forever because they'll cheat. And
then what will make it stop, though? If they have the House, the Senate, and the White House, what will happen? The American people will have to really revolt?
Well, the American people are going to have to step up, and I would basically once again go to West Virginia and say, you have to flip Joe Manchin on these votes. Okay, because he becomes very, very important. He's the one guy who's gettable on the Democrat side. But I don't want to.
But it won't have any reason to be gettable if they're in charge. So we only have a few seconds, 30 seconds left. So I think that we better go back to wake up out of this nightmare and say how critical Georgia is. What is it looking like? Because I know that you're active in the states and you're...
The polling's say it's a dead heat, but the fact is nobody knows that they can believe the polls.
Well, we know that.
It's all a matter of who turns out to vote. And if you live in Georgia, you need to turn out to vote. If you know somebody lives in Georgia, you need to make sure they turn out to vote. Bottom line is if pastors and others aren't every single day from now until January 5 telling their congregation that everything is on the line, they have to vote, then we may wake up on January 6th with a totally different world than we started with.
A world that will still survive. Happy New Year. I have one more guest, a pastor. Thank you, Richard, for joining me. Well, it is supposed to be a happy new year, and I'm hoping that we're not depressing you because things are getting darker here, but we're trying to get both, I suppose, the best of time, the worst of time. But we know that God is always in charge, and I think that that's what not only Dr. Allen reminded us, and then Jonathan reminded us, and then Richard, we Christians are going to be still here warring in Washington, D.C. But my next guest is going to really bring us something special because he is a pastor, Reverend Tim Lateef. He is the Clergy Center Director here at CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, and from a family of pastors. You heard his testimony last week, and Tim, I tell you, it's welcome and thank you. We're going to be on a lot and talking about these things. It looks like it's persecution church time. We know the scripture tells us that there's a time of peace and then a time of war, and there's fear. There's a lot of fear right now because we're coming out of COVID. We are coming out of a lot of fear. We came out of the racial tensions that people are still trying to sort through because the demands of the Black Lives Matters, they are Marxist. They are secular. They have no intention on respecting the boundaries of the church or the ability for people to freely express themselves in church. They're hostile to business and to capitalism in our country. They're hostile to the Constitution. They think the country is inherently evil, and therefore they want to overthrow it. So you got Christianity, you got capitalism, and you got the Constitution, all under threat as Washington changes hands politically, but the culture definitely is under siege. So I'm glad you brought your Bible, brother. What's God saying?
Well, I was thinking about some particular verses, and that really can be an encouragement. But I thought about this year, just what this year has been like for the church, for our viewers, for supporters. And I thought about 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. It says, "We are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed." Wow. And that is such a reminder for us as the church that, yes, it is trying times. It's times that many of us are discouraged, but we should realize that we're not destroyed. Right. If you're listening to this right now, you are not destroyed. God is with you. Right. And we need to know that even going into this new year.
When you say God is with you, what about for those that they feel that He's not? They lost their loved one, they lost their spouse. We talked last week, for Christmas, how many had to spend Christmas alone. Now we're going into a new year, more uncertainty, a vaccine that's been politicized. A regime, half the country. We are split in half as a country. We are exactly at the place we were in the 1850s. Dr. Allen, I think it was that mentioned Abraham Lincoln. We're there. And imagine going into a civil war.
Well, I think so much of it is about perspective. I think about the Apostle Paul and writing one of his last letters before closing of his ministry and the end of his life. And he was under arrest at this time, which he is many times with many of his letters. But to the church,
so we should be prepared for that
but to the and he was ministering in that position. But to the church of Philippi, when he wrote this letter, despite his circumstance, it's known as the letter of joy, meaning that he used joy or form of the word joy more than any other letter that he ever had written. And that meant that he had a perspective that was greater than his circumstance. And that's what it's going to take for the church. There has to be a perspective that is on Christ. It reminds me of the song that says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus," meaning that his perspective, he knew that what was around him was enough for him to give up. It was enough for him to say, I can't do that. But he wrote in that letter that my perspective is on Christ. I'm going to go after Christ, and I want to know Him. I want a deep knowledge of Him, because if I have that perspective, it can help me in this everyday life, in this natural life that I'm living in.
So do you think that that's why we had to go through that dark season and still may get even darker? Is it that we as Christians in America have become too comfortable in our Christianity? We become like couch Christians because Jonathan talked a lot about, the persecution that some of the churches have been dealing with, that a pastor was actually arrested and people don't even know that happened. And how many churches were so willingly saying, I'm going to shut down. I don't care the impact on the health of the people that are now all alone during the most fearful time of uncertainty, and they're in their apartments all locked up, or they're in their home all locked up with nobody, and the pastor's not there either. Did God do this on purpose so that maybe we would rediscover him?
Well, I can't say exactly what he did on purpose or didn't do, but what I do know is that he's sovereign, meaning that if he's sovereign, he's in control of the good. He's in control of what seemingly is bad. The psalmist David, he wrote it like this. He said, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praises shall continually be in my mouth. Right. Meaning that regardless of what I see or what I face, I know that God is in control. So back to that letter that we were just talking about, Paul wrote in that 3rd chapter, he says, I want to know Christ. He says, I want to know him in 2 ways. I want to know him in the power of his resurrection, but also sharing in his suffering. This was a time of suffering, and it will be a time of suffering. But guess what? Suffering actually doesn't mean that Christ isn't with you. Suffering actually means that God is with you, because those that are suffering, we suffer not for evil doing, but for good doing. Now, the other side of that is that I want to know him in the power of his resurrection, which means this, that this is not just a time where we suffer all the time. There is victory on the other side of this. So for pastors, there has to be a perspective. I want to encourage you to press forward. That's what it says in this letter. It says to press on and take hold of what Christ has taken hold of me, meaning going back to the moment of when you first came to know Christ, understanding that this is bigger than right now, that God has done something before in our lives and brought us through, and he will do it again.
Do you feel that there are enough pastors? You work with clergy. You know, we have in our network quite a few clergy, and so you're on top of them all the time and talking to them all the time. Are there enough of them that are ready to enter into the fellowship of his suffering? One translation says this is an opportunity for the church to say we're going to embrace dark as well. Will the people themselves have leadership? Are there enough pastors that are going to say, oh, we're going to fight through this for God's kingdom, even if it takes away everything? I mean, they're shutting down people's accounts online. You know, if you're associated with certain people, they're after us. We've been shut down. Our show already has been shut out of major places because of our stand that marriage should be between a man and a woman, that this is consistent with Scripture. And then they don't even like one of our advertisers, so they've shut us out. And others are dealing with this. Some are dealing with where they can't even take the credit card anymore. They're not able to get offerings because the council culture has determined that they are a hate group. Are there enough pastors to help us walk through this?
Well, number one, I believe there is. And in Scripture has made it very clear that God will use who's available. There is a remnant that is available. And we go into the book of Kings, right? There are 7,000 that have not bowed, right? And they're there. And we have to be confident that, and we have to know it. Here's the second piece.
You know what I like about that? Wait, hold on, because you remember when God had to show Elijah that I've got 7,000 men who haven't bowed down to the Baal? That's when he met Elisha. The very next, I'm like, wow, that's kind of interesting. He didn't see the other 7,000, but he sure met a warrior.
Here's the second piece of that. The second piece is, then God is going to give us creative ways to be bold and do what we need to do. Meaning, just like we're doing with this show, we're not going to wait for an opportunity for a media outlet to say, hey, we want to hear your perspective. No, we go and create that perspective. In the education world, we're not waiting at all for someone to say, okay, we want to see the world the way you see it. No, pastors, start your churches, start your schools, homeschool your children, whatever it takes. So I believe that God can give us creativity and wisdom to say, if those doors have closed, and many times you hear this in the ways that individuals will pray, it'll say, God, open a door that no man can close. And that's what we need to be praying for.
Okay, so we'll be praying for God to open the door that no man will close, and then we'll be preparing, and the pastors will be preparing to move. What was that warrior who said, we're not retreating, we're just going to advance in a different direction. So is that new direction that we have to now go to state activity? You mentioned schools. Is this time for get out of the public school, get back into the schools, get your school up, and believe to God that that He'll take care of the financial need? That's most of the reason that pastors don't have schools, because someone has to train up that next generation of youth, and turning them over to the secular and to the public school is going to get darker if we keep doing that, because they really are buying into these ideas that are the antithesis of the Scripture.
Well, I wrote on this earlier this year, and I talked about that there needs to be an aspect of faith over fear. And when you first make that decision to say, I'm going to believe in God, then I believe He speaks to you. I mean, that's what He did to Timothy. He talked to Timothy and He said, God has not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. Meaning that I need to replace whatever is not like me me and give you what is going to be like me to equip you to do what I've called you to do. So I do believe that God can equip his saints and equip his leaders to do what the work that needs to be done in this time.
I believe that too, Tim, but I don't. Our culture shouldn't be this dark. We do have a First Amendment to assemble, to express our religious beliefs, and yet we're in a very secular environment. So that means that someone hasn't done something, because there's really no excuse for this evil to have prevailed to the degree that it has. So I guess that's kind of where I am getting stuck and asking that question. Even if you only have that few, those little remnants, I don't for 1 minute think that Christianity is not going to survive.
Right.
I just don't want it to survive the way that it is in all these other countries, to where it's underground.
Well, the bottom line is that we are light bearers, meaning that we have to take our rightful position, and it's not too late. Yes, damage has been done. Yes, there is dismayed hearts. There are discouraged hearts, but it is not over. We win, and we have to be confident in that. And here's the deal. We have to make sure that we're spending time in the Word of God. We're spending time on our knees and praying. We're spending time feeding our spirit, so that way we can be encouraged. If we don't do that, then yes, we will look at it from a perspective that is the opposite of what we saw in Scripture.
And what we want to see in Scripture, because you got more people that are now running toward a more liberal view of the Scriptures. Well, there is some social justice in there somewhere. Well, there is an opportunity for us to say that we can be for killing what God calls his reward in the womb. Well, we can't, all of the things that are counter, and call yourself a pastor and get away with it. I mean, we're seeing that in Georgia. It just like, how did anyone even think that this was a pastor and would even allow him in a pulpit? So what I'm hearing you say then, for the new year, you're encouraging people to go back to their first love.
That's right.
Go to rediscover, maybe get up another 30 minutes early and start getting back into who you are and what you believe and why you believe it, so that you can defend it. Am I calling you out of place you're not going?
Well, no, I believe that is true. And it goes back to our episode last week when we talked about our testimony, right? There is no testimony without a test. This is a test. So that means that we have to say, Lord, what are you calling me to do? I need to hear from you. I can't do this in my own strength, but I'm available. I'm ready, and I'm going to do what you called me to do. And that's what he's calling our pastors. Press forward, as Paul was saying, and do what God has called us to do.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a command from God. You saying you're a pastor, you better be one now, because you're the test. The wheat and the tares have been growing together, and now it's time for the cleansing. We got to figure out what we're going to do next. Tim, thank you. Thank you for that encouraging word from the Scripture. And I'll be right back with some final thoughts about what you've heard and what I'm thinking about for this new year. Hallelujah. The Lord is risen indeed, and we are now in a new year, and we're going to have a happy one, because we can be joyful and happy amidst any storm. As you've just heard, I just love Reverend Tim, because he's going to always give the perspective of what God is saying. I guess my discouragement, based on what Jonathan was saying and what Richard was saying, and even Dr. Allen to a certain point was saying, is that we shouldn't be where we are in this culture. We have Christianity. We are the ones that have that light. And I understand, I suppose, how people can have that light and not recognize that Christ just loves us so much that we shouldn't let our culture die, and we shouldn't let people die, and we shouldn't let government push us out of the public square. I suppose I didn't grow up in a Christian home, as many of you know, so like our pastors did. But so maybe I want the churches open, because I so appreciate it. After you've lived a life of criminal activity and drug activity and sexual activity and abortion activity and welfare activity, and then you get saved, maybe that's why I just can't see why. And I'm very intolerant of pastors that would shut their doors when people need us us the most. They need us. Now, we personally can be involved, and we want to be involved to share that light, but let's bring people back into the house of the Lord so that we can fellowship together, lift our hands in honor of him, even as we go to fight again for our culture, for our children, for our children's children. There's much work to do. We've got to do some of it this year for sure. Coming out of January, it's going to be tough, but I think that God is going to sustain all of us. He's so faithful. He loves us so dearly. So please have a happy new year. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. The Lord is risen indeed.